So I'm back working on the Friden STW10 mechanical calculator. This is the one that, if you've been watching the previous videos, you know that it got damaged in shipping. The damage is far more extensive than I'd first realised. Externally the unit didn't look too bad, but I think the problem was it had been dropped onto its face and all the keys were essentially mashed down into the machine. And because of the way this machine works, whenever you push a key in, it locks out all the other keys, and that's to prevent you trying to run two different functions at the same time, because obviously being mechanical, that wouldn't be good for the internal mechanism. It's trying to do two things at the same time will probably do some damage. But because there's the lockouts within the mechanisms, what has happened is, as all the keys are pushed down at the same time, a lot of the internal linkages and shafts got bent and damaged and some gears stripped. I've been making new parts, repairing the ones that I could, straightening some of the shafts. If you're interested in how I go about doing that, then let me know. It's not easy getting a shaft perfectly straight, but there are methods you can use that will get them very close. And the thing with this machine is the tolerances are very tight, so some of the adjustments you're looking at 1/1000th of an inch adjustment. Luckily I have found the service manual for this. It's a bit unclear in some areas, but it does give you the settings. And because this entire machine has been distorted and bent, it means that I've had to go through and completely adjust everything. Now, I did take the machine off of the base. There's a big aluminium cast base, and that was bent, and I did manage to very carefully get it fairly straight using the hydraulic press. Very nerve-wracking, because obviously it could just crack and split in two or more pieces at any time, but luckily I did get it very flat again. Put the mechanics back onto it, but obviously the mechanics themselves, the brackets, whatever, are also bent. So I've been going through and straightening those out, repairing certain parts of it. I think I've already shown one part that I had to repair, which is this rack down here. Now, one of the problems with this sort of machine is that the manual has drawings in it. The hand drawn, so they're not very clear, but it will have instructions such as loosen the screws, adjust the bracket, tighten the screws, and it shows the screws. The problem is you can't get to them. So for example, there's if I put a number into the multiplier, which took me quite a long time to get this to work to this extent. Now, the rack that I made is used for aligning each of the drums on the multiplier. So what it does is there's a little pull inside here, and each time you press a key it moves it onto the next location, and then it stops it hopefully in line with the little fingers that go from the keyboard up to the actual mechanism, which means this has got to be aligned in a certain way to align the keyboard with this, otherwise you can't enter any values. But when you try to do a multiplication or a clear of the number that you've entered, another part of the mechanism that comes into play, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, I'll shine a torch down, but you can see there's a rack down in the bottom there, and as the machine tries to process the multiplication, it uses an eccentric and a pull to engage with the teeth in that rack, but it does it in such a way that it has to be in sync with this rack. So in other words, this has got to be put into a certain position, and then the pull will move it on to the next position, and those two relative to each other have to be correct, and if they're not, then the whole machine will jam up. And that is kind of the feature of this machine. I'm sure that Curious Mark glossed over a lot of the problems he had when he restored his, but he did mention that it has a tendency to jam up when things aren't working properly, and that is one of the key problems when you're trying to work on one of these. they do have a tendency to jam up in really bizarre ways, and you can't unjam it just by turning it backwards. And once it's gone into certain positions, you can't back out of them, and you usually end up having to take bits off it, like the carriage or whatever, to get it unjammed. But as I say, I've been going through, there's an awful lot of work to do on it yet, a lot more repairs to do. The keyboard needs completely taking apart, all the keys on it are bent over, but I can still use it. As with marks, I've also been finding a very large number of stuck shafts and pivots and whatever, and that just adds to the problems. Sometimes it's unclear whether something's actually stuck because the grease has hardened, or if there's something else stopping it moving. But as I say, I'm getting close to being able to do some actual calculations with it, albeit without the keyboard. One thing I have found extremely useful is one of these. It is essentially equivalent to a debugger if this was a firmware machine. So if you imagine this is a software or firmware calculator, then really what you need to be able to do to fault find is to single step through your code, and that's what this effectively lets you do in a mechanical sense. So what you can do is put a bolt, bring the light over so we can see a bit more clearly. You can put a bolt into the end of this. It is designed to do this. Apparently there's a special tool for doing this. I've got no idea what it looks like, but this works just as well. I wouldn't advise using a spanner because you don't want to put too much force into it. Something will break if you do that, or bend. And that is one point as well, is that if you start putting too much force into any of the machine, you'll bend certain linkages and you end up making more work for yourself. But what this lets you do is, if we want to do a calculation, which I have now got the add and subtract working, so I've freed up all the keys, repaired all the interlinkages so that I can now put it into the certain modes. And the way the machine works is when you press a key, it latches into a certain mode, and then the machine will process that mode, and at the end it will pop the key back up to indicate that the mode is finished. So if I put it into addition mode, it won't add anything because there's nothing putting a value into the keys, but you can manually hold these into a different location, and that will put a value into the rack. So if I push the plus sign down, what I can do now is turn this. This shouldn't take a lot of force. If it takes a lot of force to turn, then there's something wrong. So you can turn it, and it lets you look at the various different bits of the machine to see if the things that are supposed to be happening are actually happening. So it's finished the additions. If I press the key again, you'll be able to see various bits of the machine moving as it processes the function. And it is a very good way of trying to see what's moving, what's binding. And this is especially useful with the multiplication unit, which is very difficult to see exactly what's going on, and pretty much impossible to see what's going on if you use the drive motor. So for example, if I put it into multiplication clear, so it should now start to clear the multiplication drum, and you can see the various bits operating, and you can see how it's driving this, and which bits are turning, which bits are binding, and if something does bind up, you can feel it straight away on the handle as you turn it. You can see it's gradually working its way through, clearing off the multiplier drum. This only takes a second or two if you use the motor, but as I say, if it does bind up, then you end up with a headache trying to unjam the machine. And that's the end of the clear cycle. So using this method, you can go through and very slowly rotate the machine to find out exactly what's not moving, if any of the latches and linkages are too slow because they're dirty or the grease has dried up, and you can see that as well. So that's as far as I've got at the moment. As I say, a lot more work to do. Just as a final demonstration, I can now, if I just plug it in, I can now actually run certain functions using the motor without it trying to destroy itself or completely locking up. So I can add, as you can see, it's actually adding. If I put a value into here, it will actually do the calculation correctly, and the same thing with subtraction. That's also now working. Unfortunately I can't demonstrate this because I'm holding the camera with one hand, so I can't press two things at the same time. I've also got the rack, the carriage traverse working as well. That was a big headache. The carriage did jam up. As I said in the previous video, that's because the entire carriage was bent and I had to completely strip it down and remachine the main part of it, and then readjust everything to make sure that the adjustment of the rack in the slides was correct. When I got it, this thing was just mashed completely down into the machine, and I had a job getting it out. And when I did get it out, it was bent, so I had to repair that, and also then straighten the rails that it runs in, and then readjust everything so that the carriage would move as it should do from side to side. All the linkages for the various functions I've also been clearing up and trying to get working. There's still a few that don't work as they should. But okay, I'm making progress. I'm still not sure if it can be revived completely. As I said, the amount of damage is quite extensive. But I didn't want to throw it away. It's they're too rare. As I say, I've been looking for one of these for a long time, and I'd really like to get it working if I can. But it is going to be quite a significant task. I was hoping when I bought it, it would just be a case of cleaning it, oiling it, freeing up all the linkages, and then making any small adjustments. But this is going to be quite an epic repair. I'll make a few more videos on it as I go along. If there's anything you want to look at in particular, then let me know.